The truck stop diner was empty at 3:27 a.m., just the way I liked it. My name's Charlie Whitaker, been a trucker for 15 years, and I've seen my fair share of weird stuff out on the road. But nothing comes close to what I'm about to tell you. I was hauling a full load through the winding stretches of Route 17, cutting through the thick forests of West Virginia. It was one of those roads where you lose cell service for hours, and the only thing keeping you company is the sound of your own engine and the hum of the tires on asphalt. That night, I had a late delivery, and I'd stopped for coffee at the diner just off the highway before heading out for the last leg of my trip. The waitress, a tired-looking woman named Connie, had warned me to stay clear of the logging road about 12 miles up. "There's been accidents," she'd said, her voice low like she didn't want anyone else to hear. I shrugged it off. Truckers hear all kinds of superstitious crap out in the sticks. Ghost stories, urban legends, you name it. But Connie looked genuinely uneasy. "Accidents? What kind of accidents?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder like someone might be listening. "Things disappear. People, vehicles, and other things," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I chuckled. "Probably just drunk drivers running off the road." Her expression didn't change. "Just be careful out there, okay?" I waved her off, paid for my coffee, and got back in the truck. I didn't think about Connie's warning again until I hit the logging road she mentioned. That's when things got strange. The logging road was narrower than I expected, barely wide enough for my rig. Towering pines loomed on either side, their gnarled branches knitting together overhead, blocking out the moonlight. My headlights punched through the darkness, illuminating the swirling mist that clung to the ground like a bad omen. I wasn't one to spook easily, but something about that stretch of road didn't sit right. It was too quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just the low growl of my engine and the occasional pop of gravel under my tires. About 6 miles in, my CB radio crackled to life. "Breaker 19, you out there?" The voice was low, distorted, like it was coming through a cheap speaker. I picked up the mic. "Yeah, I'm here. What's your 20? Silence. Then, after a few seconds, the same voice came back, clearer this time. "You shouldn't be here." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Who is this?" I asked, scanning the road ahead. Again, no response. I shook my head, chalking it up to some bored joker playing games. I turned the CB volume down and focused on driving. But the farther I went, the heavier the air seemed to get, like the weight of the trees was pressing down on me. And then I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow in my peripheral vision, darting between the trees on the left side of the road. I told myself it was a deer, maybe a coyote, but then it moved again, this time on the right. Fast. Too fast for anything I'd seen before. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. "Get a grip, Charlie," I muttered under my breath. That's when the figure stepped out onto the road. It was tall, easily 7 feet, and impossibly thin, its limbs stretched like it had been pulled out of shape. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its head was wrong. Too narrow, with a mouth that stretched across its entire face, lips curled back in what looked like a permanent snarl. I slammed on the brakes, my rig skidding on the gravel as the thing just stood there, staring at me with empty, hollow eyes. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it, that my brain was playing tricks on me. But then it moved, tilting its head like a curious dog. And it smiled. That's when I realized it wasn't alone. To my left and right, more figures emerged from the woods, their pale forms gliding silently across the ground like they weren't even touching it. They surrounded my truck, their movements unervingly synchronized. I fumbled for the gear shift, my hands shaking, and threw the rig into reverse. The engine roared as I started backing up, but the figures didn't flinch. They just stood there, watching, their grotesque smiles never wavering. Then the CB crackled again. "You can't leave," the voice said, and this time it wasn't distorted. It was clear, familiar. It was my voice. My heart nearly stopped when I heard my own voice coming through the CB. The weight of the moment crashed down on me, making my skin crawl. I threw a glance at the mic like it was some kind of cursed object and gripped the wheel tighter, my foot still pressing down hard on the brake. The figures were closing in now, their movements slow but deliberate. One of them placed a hand, if you could call it that, on the hood of my truck. Its fingers were unnaturally long, jointed in too many places, and the way they flexed made me feel sick. The thing leaned closer, its face inches from the windshield, and I saw its mouth moving like it was trying to speak, but no sound came out. I slammed my fist on the horn, hoping the noise would scare them off, but the sound barely registered before it was swallowed by the oppressive silence around me. The creature didn't even flinch. Then the CB crackled again. "Don't fight it, Charlie. Let it happen." Couldn't breathe. That voice, my voice, was coming through loud and clear, like someone was sitting right there in the cab with me. "Who the hell are you?" I shouted, snatching up the mic. No answer. That's when the thing on my hood slammed its hand down, hard enough to leave a dent in the metal. Its head snapped to the side, jerking unnaturally, and its mouth opened wider than should have been physically possible. I didn't wait to see what came next. I slammed the truck into gear and floored it. The engine roared as the rig lurched forward, knocking the figure off the hood. The others scattered, their pale forms vanishing into the trees as my headlights cut through the mist. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought I'd escaped. But then the air inside the cab grew cold. Not just chilly, freezing. My breath fogged up in front of me, and I could feel the frost creeping across the inside of the windshield. The hairs on my arms stood on end as the temperature plummeted. And then I smelled it. Rot, wet earth and decaying flesh, so strong it made my stomach churn. I gagged, my eyes watering, and glanced in the rearview mirror. That's when I saw it. Something was in the cab with me. It was crouched in the sleeper compartment, its body twisted and contorted like it had been crammed into a space far too small for it. Its face was inches from the mirror, staring directly at me with those empty, hollow eyes. I swerved, nearly running off the road, and twisted around in my seat to look. Nothing. The sleeper was empty. But when I turned back to the road, my stomach dropped. The pale figures were ahead of me again, standing in the middle of the road like they'd been waiting for me all along. I had no choice. I couldn't stop, not with whatever the hell was toying with me. So I hit the gas. The truck barreled forward, and for a split second, I felt a sick sense of satisfaction as I plowed through the figures. But that satisfaction turned to pure terror when I realized they didn't fall. They passed through the truck like smoke, their translucent forms slipping through the cab, and as they did, I heard them whispering. Not words, not anything I could understand. Just a low, guttural murmur that burrowed into my ears and made my brain feel like it was splitting apart. And then, they were gone. The road ahead was empty again, the forest silent. The frost on the windshield melted, and the smell of rot faded. For a moment, I thought it was over, until I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It was 3:27 a.m., the exact same time I'd left the diner. I stared at the clock, the glowing green numbers burning into my brain. 3:27 a.m. That couldn't be right. I'd been driving for nearly an hour. My hands trembled on the wheel, and a cold sweat ran down the back of my neck. "No," I muttered, shaking my head. "No way." But it didn't change. The clock just sat there, mocking me, frozen in time. I reached for my phone, desperate to check the time, maybe call for help, but the screen wouldn't turn on. Just a black, lifeless rectangle in my hand. The CB crackled again, and this time, I nearly jumped out of my seat. "Charlie?" The voice was faint, like a whisper carried on the wind, but it wasn't mine this time. It was something else, something hollow and wet, like someone trying to speak through a mouthful of water. "Who are you?" I shouted, gripping the mic so hard I thought it might snap. Silence. And then, "You shouldn't have run." The truck jolted violently, as if something massive had slammed into the side of the trailer. I wrestled with the wheel, trying to keep the rig steady, but it swerved dangerously close to the edge of the road. Another impact, this one harder, and I felt the trailer tilt. Whatever was hitting me, It was strong enough to move 40 tons of steel and cargo like it was a toy. I glanced at the side mirror and froze. Something was crawling along the side of the trailer. It was one of them, those pale figures, but its body was twisted into something even more grotesque. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, clawing into the metal like it was scaling a cliff. Its head snapped toward the cab, and I saw its mouth open wide, that same terrible grin stretching across its face. I floored it, the engine screaming as I pushed the rig as fast as it would go. The figure clung on, its body flapping in the wind like a tattered flag, but it didn't let go. Then it started to climb. Its hands, if you could call them that, reached the edge of the cab, and I felt the truck shudder as its weight shifted onto the roof. The whispers started again, louder this time, echoing inside the cab like a swarm of voices, all speaking at once. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside my head, scratching and clawing like it was trying to get in. "Let us in, Charlie," the voices hissed. I don't know what came over me, but I snapped. I reached into the passenger seat, grabbed the tire iron I always kept there, and swung it at the roof of the cab as hard as I could. The metal rang out with a deafening clang, and for a moment, the whispers stopped. And then the roof buckled. A pale hand punched through the metal, clawing at the air, and I didn't think. I just acted. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded, the tires screaming against the asphalt, and the figure on the roof was flung forward, slamming into the road ahead. But it didn't stay down. It rose, its body jerking and twitching as it stood. Behind it, more figures emerged from the forest, their hollow eyes locking onto me. I threw the truck into reverse, the rig lurching backward as I tried to put some distance between us. My mind was racing, every instinct screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. And then I saw it, a tunnel up ahead, carved into the side of the mountain. It was the old coal transport route, long abandoned and barely wide enough for my rig. But it was my only chance. I gunned it, the engine roaring as I sped toward the tunnel, the pale figures closing in behind me. The whispers grew louder, deafening now, and I felt something cold brush against my neck, like a hand reaching out from the darkness. But I didn't stop. The rig barreled into the tunnel, the sound of the engine echoing off the walls, and the darkness swallowed me whole. The tunnel swallowed me whole, the pale headlights barely cutting through the suffocating black. My hands gripped the wheel like a lifeline, my knuckles ghostly white as I pushed the rig deeper into the void. The engine echoed off the jagged walls, creating a sound that felt alive, like the growl of some ancient predator closing in. I kept glancing at my mirrors, expecting to see those figures chasing me, but there was nothing, just an endless stretch of black behind me, as if the tunnel had devoured the road entirely. Then the whispers started again. They weren't coming from outside this time. They were inside the cab, surrounding me, overlapping, growing louder and louder until it felt like my skull might split open. "Charlie?" I slammed my fist into the dash. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice cracking. But the whispers only grew more insistent, more urgent. "Charlie, stop the truck." I refused to listen, pressing the gas pedal harder, even as the tunnel narrowed around me. The walls seemed to close in, scraping the edges of the trailer, but I didn't care. If I stopped now, I was dead. That's when I saw the lights. Up ahead, too dim, flickering beams of light appeared in the distance, swaying gently like lanterns in a storm. At first, I thought it might be another truck, but as I got closer, I realized they weren't headlights. They were eyes, massive, yellow, blinking eyes. The truck shuddered violently, the engine straining as if something enormous was pressing down on the trailer. I fought to keep control, my heart hammering in my chest as the eyes grew larger, closer, impossibly fast. And then it stepped into the light. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. An enormous, lumbering creature with a body that seemed to shift and writhe, like it was made of shadows and tar. Its limbs were long and spindly, ending in razor-sharp claws that scraped against the tunnel walls, sending sparks flying. Its head was the worst part, elongated, with a gaping maw that stretched open to reveal rows upon rows of jagged teeth. And those eyes, those damn eyes burned into me, unblinking, as if it was looking straight into my soul. The rig screamed in protest as I slammed the brakes, the tires skidding on the uneven ground. The creature loomed over the truck, its claws raking across the roof, tearing through metal like it was paper. For a moment, I thought about jumping out, abandoning the rig and running for my life. But something told me it wouldn't matter. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't going to let me go. The whispers were deafening now, drowning out even the sound of the engine. "Let us in, Charlie. Let us in," I snapped. Reaching over to the passenger seat, I grabbed the emergency flare gun I kept for breakdowns. My hands shook as I fumbled to load it, the creature's claws punching through the cab roof again and again, inches from my head. With a deep breath, I aimed the flare gun at the hole in the roof and pulled the trigger. The flare shot out with a blinding flash, striking the creature square in its gaping maw. The tunnel lit up in an explosion of red light, and for the first time, I heard the thing scream, a bone-rattling, otherworldly wail that shook the entire truck. The creature reared back, its massive body thrashing as the flare burned inside it, molten tar dripping from its mouth. I didn't waste a second. Slamming the truck into reverse, I floored it, the rig screeching as it tore back through the tunnel. The creature clawed at the walls, trying to follow, but its massive form was too large, too slow. I could see the faint glow of the tunnel entrance behind me now, growing brighter with every passing second. Freedom. The whispers faded, replaced by the roar of the engine and the distant screams of the creature as it disappeared into the darkness. Finally, the rig burst out of the tunnel and back onto the open road. I slammed the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt, and leapt out of the cab, collapsing onto the asphalt. The tunnel loomed behind me, silent and still, as if nothing had ever been there. But I knew better. I didn't tell anyone about what happened that night. Who would believe me? All I know is I never took Route 17 again. And every time I pass by a dark tunnel or an empty road, I feel it watching, waiting. I sat on the asphalt for what felt like hours, my legs trembling and my lungs burning from the cold night air. The silence outside the truck was almost worse than the chaos inside that tunnel. My rig idled behind me, the engine still rumbling as if it, too, was shaken by whatever the hell we had just survived. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something had followed me out of that tunnel. Finally, I gathered enough courage to stand. My legs felt like jelly, but I managed to stumble back to the cab. The adrenaline was wearing off, and exhaustion hit me like a freight train. I just wanted to get out of there, back to the highway, back to somewhere with people, lights, noise, anything but this suffocating emptiness. I climbed into the cab and shut the door, locking it out of habit, even though I knew it wouldn't stop whatever I just faced. The cabin still smelled faintly of rot, and the whispering, it lingered, faint, almost imperceptible, like the echo of something that refused to die. I flicked on the overhead light, desperate for something to chase away the shadows. That's when I saw it. A single handprint on the inside of the windshield. It wasn't human. The fingers were too long, the palm too narrow, and the texture. It looked like it had been pressed into the glass with something wet and slimy. My chest tightened, and my breath hitched as I reached out, trembling, to touch it. It was cold, freezing. I jerked my hand back, my heart racing. The handprint began to fade, evaporating into the air as if it had never been there. I stared at the glass, my mind racing, trying to process what the hell was happening. And then I heard it again. Not the whispers this time, not the guttural alien murmurs that had haunted me in the tunnel. This was different. Faint, almost imperceptible, but undeniably real. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere behind the truck. The gravel crunched under the weight of something heavy, something big. I killed the overhead light and froze. Every muscle in my body tensed as I strained to listen. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and my mind raced with options. I could drive, floor it, and get the hell out of there. But what if whatever it was could follow me? What if it was already in the truck? The sound stopped, My heart pounded in the silence, each beat a drum in my ears. I glanced at the side mirror, but the night was too dark. The road behind me was nothing but an inky void. Then the CB crackled one last time. "Charlie." The voice was mine again, calm, familiar, but there was something off about it, like it was smiling as it spoke. "See you soon." The CB went dead. I didn't think. I slammed the rig into gear and floored it, tearing down the road like a bat out of hell. The trees blurred past, the darkness closing in around me, but I didn't dare stop. Not until I reached the highway. When I finally pulled into a crowded truck stop hours later, I sat in the cab for a long time, staring at the windshield. The handprint was back. Epilogue: it's been 6 months since that night, and I haven't been back on Route 17. Hell, I haven't taken a single back road since. I stick to the interstates now, the well-lit highways where I can see for miles. But it doesn't matter. The whispers are still with me. Sometimes, late at night, I hear my own voice crackling through the CB, calling my name. And when I look in the mirrors, I swear I see something moving in the shadows, just out of sight. I know it's still out there, and I know it's waiting. 6 months turned into a year, but the memories never faded. Every night on the road, I felt it, like a shadow hanging over my shoulder, watching, waiting. The handprint on the windshield hadn't reappeared since that night, but the whispers, oh, the whispers never left. They were subtle at first, easy to write off as the wind howling past the truck or the static from the CB. But late at night, when the road stretched endlessly ahead and the world around me felt deserted, they'd creep in. "Charlie." Sometimes it was my voice. Other times it was different, deeper, colder, like the echoes of something ancient. And no matter how loud I cranked the radio or how many cigarettes I burned to calm my nerves, it always found a way back. One night, while hauling a load through Kansas, I thought I'd finally hit my breaking point. The whispers were louder than they'd ever been, filling the cab like a storm. I pulled off the highway and into a rest area, desperate for a moment of silence. It was one of those remote stops, just a couple of vending machines and a bathroom, surrounded by miles of flat, empty fields. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and wet earth, and the night was darker than I'd ever seen. No moon, no stars, just a void overhead. I killed the engine and sat there, gripping the wheel so hard my fingers ached. My heart pounded as I stared into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see one of those pale figures staring back at me. But there was nothing, just the empty truck lot stretching into the shadows. "Get a grip, Charlie," I muttered, trying to steady my breathing. Then I heard it, a low, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the trailer. I froze, every muscle in my body screaming at me to move, to do something. But I just sat there, paralyzed, as the tapping grew louder. It wasn't random. It had a pattern, deliberate and slow, like someone or something was knocking on the side of the trailer. Finally, I grabbed the tire iron from the passenger seat and threw the door open, stepping out into the cold night air. The sound stopped immediately, leaving me alone in the deafening silence. I circled the truck, my breath visible in the chill as I approached the trailer. The metal gleamed faintly under the dim light of the rest stop, but there was no sign of anything or anyone around. Then I saw it. Near the back of the trailer, scrawled into the grime-covered metal, was a single word. "Soon." My blood ran cold, and I stumbled back, dropping the tire iron. My heart was racing, my mind spinning as I scrambled back into the cab and locked the doors. I didn't sleep that night. Hell, I didn't even close my eyes. I just sat there, gripping the wheel, staring into the dark, waiting for whatever had left that message to show itself. But nothing came. The sun eventually rose, bathing the rest stop in light, and I took it as my cue to leave. I fired up the engine and hit the road, determined to put as much distance as I could between me and that place. That was the last time I saw the message. But the whispers, they never stopped. It's been 3 years now, and I've left trucking behind. I took a job at a warehouse, safe in the daylight, surrounded by people. But every now and then, late at night, when the world goes quiet, I hear it. "Charlie." And I know, is still out there, waiting,